The moment I realized something was wrong was not when my sister announced her engagement or when my parents clinked their glasses at Christmas dinner or even when my name was missing from the seating cards. It was when my father slid a thin envelope across the table toward me and said without looking up, "This is for you. Don't make a scene." I was 32 years old, sitting in my childhood home in suburban Connecticut, surrounded by garlands, polite laughter, and the smell of overcooked turkey. My hands were steady when I picked up the envelope. That's what surprised me most. No shaking, no rush of heat. Just a quiet, almost clinical curiosity, like I was opening mail that belonged to someone else. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a gift card. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even a check. It was a copy of my parents' updated will. My name appeared once buried halfway down the page next to a number so small, I thought it was a typo. $25,000. A courtesy amount, really. The kind you leave to a distant relative, so no one can say you forgot them entirely. Across the table, my younger sister Brooke laughed at something her fiancé said, her hand resting on the diamond ring my parents had helped pay for. My older brother Evan was already talking about honeymoon plans, assuming as always that his life would unfold exactly as promised. No one was watching me. That's how it had always been. I was present but not accounted for. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. My mother finally glanced up, her smile fixed and rehearsed. "You understand," she said softly. "This isn't personal." That was the first lie of the night. My name is Claire Donovan. I work in compliance for a mid-sized healthcare firm in New Jersey. I pay my own mortgage. I've never borrowed money from my parents as an adult. I'm not estranged, not rebellious, not dramatic. I show up, I call on birthdays, I send thank you notes. And yet in that moment, I understood something I'd been circling for years without admitting out loud. In my family, love had never been unconditional. It had been transactional. The dinner continued as if nothing had happened. My father cleared his throat and launched into a story about the legacy they were building. My mother nodded along, adding details about the family trust, the vacation property in Vermont, the business interests they'd structured so carefully for the future. Their future, not mine. I listened. I always listened. I'd learned long ago that asking questions only made people uncomfortable, and discomfort was something my family punished subtly but effectively. At the end of the table, my Aunt Marlene leaned over and whispered, "You okay, honey?" I smiled. Of course. That was the second lie of the night. Later, when I stood alone in my old bedroom, the one my mother had converted into a storage space without asking, I reread the document. The numbers were precise, the language airtight. A lawyer had drafted this carefully, which meant this hadn't been impulsive. This had been planned. I noticed something else then, a clause near the bottom referencing the family business. Donovan Holdings, LLC, an entity I'd heard mentioned in passing but never discussed directly with me. My brother's name appeared repeatedly. So did my sister's. My father was listed as managing director. My name appeared nowhere near the business. That should have hurt. Instead, it clarified. I remembered Thanksgiving 3 years earlier when my promotion was announced halfway through dessert, only to be overshadowed minutes later by Brooke's pregnancy reveal. I remembered the birthday my parents forgot but later blamed on a calendar mix-up. I remembered how often I was told, "You're the independent one. You don't need as much." Independence in my family was code for exclusion. Downstairs, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, the sound of people who believed everything was exactly as it should be. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the last conversation I'd had with my grandmother before she passed. Her name was Ruth. She'd squeezed my hand and said, "Make sure you know where you stand. People will tell you you're included when they mean you're convenient." At the time, I thought she was just tired, or bitter, or projecting. Now, standing in a house that had never quite been mine, I realized she'd been warning me. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I packed my bag the next morning, hugged my parents politely, congratulated my sister, and drove back to New Jersey in silence. But something had shifted. The shock wasn't the money. It was the confirmation. I wasn't being pushed out. I had already been written out. 3 days later, back at work, I pulled the will back out of my briefcase during lunch. I read it again slower this time. That's when I noticed the date. The will had been signed 18 months earlier, right around the time my father had asked for my social security number for insurance paperwork. I closed the folder and stared at the office wall, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space between my thoughts. I didn't feel angry yet. anger requires surprise. What I felt was something colder. Curiosity. Because if they were comfortable excluding me on paper, comfortable enough to hand me proof over Christmas dinner, then there were likely other decisions they'd made without me, other uses of my absence, other ways my silence had been interpreted as consent. I opened my laptop and typed one phrase into the State Business Registry search bar. Donovan Holdings, LLC. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had a feeling I was about to find it. And whatever it was, I already knew one thing with absolute certainty. My family had underestimated me. I found the first inconsistency at 12:47 p.m., sitting alone in a glass-walled conference room with my lunch untouched and my laptop angled away from the hallway. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing warning signs, just a line of text that didn't belong. Donovan Holdings, LLC was registered in Delaware, not Connecticut. That in itself wasn't unusual. Plenty of companies do that. What caught my attention was the filing date, 2 years ago. 6 months before my father asked for my social security number. I scrolled. Managing members, Richard Donovan, Brooke Donovan, Evan Donovan. And then halfway down the page, under authorized signatory for compliance filings, there it was. Claire Donovan, my full legal name. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened, the way it does when you realize you've been walking on ice that's already cracked. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe evenly. This wasn't panic territory yet. This was information territory, and information unlike emotion could be handled. I opened the document again and read it carefully. My name appeared only once, but it was enough. Authorized signatory meant liability. It meant responsibility. It meant if anything went wrong, my name would be the one regulators circled first. I had never signed this. I checked the uploaded signature image. It was close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in the way only someone who knows their own hand would notice. The curve of the C was too sharp. The tail of the E lifted instead of dropping. Someone had copied my signature from somewhere. An old lease, a scanned tax form, a birthday card I'd signed without thinking. I felt a chill run through my arms. This wasn't favoritism. This wasn't family drama. This was something else entirely. I saved the file to a secure folder and opened a new tab. IRS business lookup, then FINRA, then the State Attorney General's database. I moved methodically the way I'd been trained to do at work when something didn't line up. Cross-reference, verify, don't assume. By the time my lunch break ended, I had 3 open documents and a growing sense that I was standing at the edge of something much larger than a will. Donovan Holdings had subsidiaries, one in logistics, one in real estate, one labeled consulting. That one raised my eyebrows. Consulting was a favorite catch-all for moving money quietly. I didn't confront my parents, not that night, not the next. I didn't call my brother or my sister. I didn't even mention it to my closest friend. I watched. At work, I paid closer attention to compliance memos. I noticed how often my father's name appeared in local business news. A quote here, a photo there. Always framed as a respectable family man, a pillar of the community. At home, I pulled my credit report. Clean, for now. No loans I didn't recognize, no accounts I hadn't opened. That was a relief, but a temporary one. If my name was already on business filings, it was only a matter of time before something else surfaced. 3 nights later, my mother called. I salute. Your Aunt Marlene mentioned you seemed quiet at Christmas, she said lightly. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay. There it was, the check-in that wasn't concern, but surveillance. I'm fine, I said. Just busy. Well, she replied after a pause that told me she was choosing her words. Your father and I hope you understand the decisions we're making. We're trying to be fair? Fair. Another word my family liked to use when they meant final. I understand, I said. And I did, just not in the way she thought. That night, I pulled up the will again. I read it not as a daughter, but as a compliance officer. The trust language was clean. Too clean. Designed to funnel control without appearing to. My brother was named executor. My sister had discretionary authority. My parents retained veto power until death. And I conveniently had no oversight role at all, except in the business, which meant they trusted me with risk, not reward. I remembered something my father used to say when I was younger. You're reliable. You won't mess things up. At the time, I'd taken it as praise. Now I heard it differently. Reliable people make good shields. The next morning, I took a personal day. I drove to a small law office in Morristown, one I'd researched carefully. No flashy website, no aggressive marketing, just a quiet reputation for estate disputes and corporate liability. The attorney's name was Daniel Hargrove, late 50s, gray hair, calm eyes, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I didn't bring the will, I didn't bring accusations, I brought questions. I may be listed as an authorized signatory on a family business without my consent, I said. What does that mean for me? He didn't react. That was a good sign. It means he said slowly that if the company violates any regulations, you could be implicated, especially if your name appears on compliance filings. What if I never signed anything? Then the question becomes how your signature got there. I slid my laptop across the desk and showed him the document. He studied it carefully, zoomed in, nodded once, and he nodded once. This isn't your signature, he said. I exhaled. That doesn't mean it won't be treated as yours until proven otherwise, he continued. The burden of proof often falls on the person whose name was used. So what do I do? He leaned back. First, you stop being passive. Second, you document everything. And third, you prepare to draw a line your family may not forgive you for. I didn't hesitate. I'm fine with that. He looked at me more closely then. Most people aren't. I've been fine with being invisible for a long time, I said. I'm not fine with being liable. That earned a small nod. Good, he said. Then here's what we do next. He outlined a plan, not dramatic, not vengeful, precise. A formal notice withdrawing my name from any business filings. A certified letter demanding documentation of my alleged consent. A quiet inquiry to the appropriate regulatory bodies framed as clarification, not accusation. You don't accuse, he said. You ask questions. Let the answers do the work. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt since Christmas. Grounded. That weekend, my brother texted me, a casual message. Hey, Dad said you might be worried about the will stuff. It's all taken care of. Don't stress. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Taken care of. I typed back, thanks. I'm just making sure I understand my role. He didn't reply. 2 days later, the certified letter was delivered. 3 days after that, my father called. His voice was tight, controlled. Why is a lawyer contacting us about the company? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I'm clarifying my legal exposure, I said. That's all. There was a pause on the line. Then, colder than I'd ever heard him, he said, You're making this into something it doesn't need to be. I smiled to myself, because that sentence told me everything. If it didn't need to be something, he wouldn't be afraid of it becoming one. I hung up shortly after, polite, brief, and as I set my phone down, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving. The first document arrived by email at 6:18 a.m., sent from an address I didn't recognize, but immediately understood. It was a PDF attachment titled Authorization Confirmation. No greeting, no explanation. Just a form letter written in dense legal language stating that I had previously consented to act as an authorized compliance signatory for Donovan Holdings, LLC, and its subsidiaries. Previously consented. I read it twice then, a third time slowly. There was no date attached to my supposed consent, no witness listed, no copy of an original agreement, just a clean statement designed to sound official enough that most people would accept it and move on. Most people. I forwarded the document to Daniel Hargrove without comment and poured myself coffee. I didn't drink. My hands were steady again. That worried me slightly. Calm in moments like this wasn't peace. It was focus. At 9:02 a.m., Daniel replied with 3 words. This helps us. That afternoon, my sister Brooke called. She never calls unless something's wrong or she wants something. Growing up, she'd perfected the art of cheerful urgency, the kind that made adults lean in and say yes before realizing they'd agreed to anything. Claire, she said too brightly. Dad's really upset. I waited. He feels like you're questioning his integrity, she continued. After everything he's done for you. There it was, the pivot, the reframing. I haven't questioned anything I said. I asked for documentation. That's the same thing, she replied quickly. You know how he is. I did know. He liked authority without accountability. Praise without scrutiny. I also know how regulators are, I said. They don't accept vibes as evidence. She laughed a short, nervous sound. You're being dramatic. I thought of the forged signature, the filings, the will. No, I said. I'm being careful. Silence stretched between us. Then her tone shifted, sharpened, just slightly. Do you really want to blow this up? It's a family business. I looked out my apartment window at the quiet street below. People walking dogs, a man loading groceries into his trunk. Ordinary lives moving forward without realizing how easily stability could be manufactured, transferred, stolen. I want to know why my name is on documents I never signed, I said. That's all. She exhaled loudly. You always do this. You take things personally. I almost smiled. Brooke, I said evenly, this isn't personal. It's legal. She hung up on me. That evening, Daniel called. They responded exactly how I expected, he said. No proof, just assertions. That tells me they're stalling. What happens next, I asked. We escalate without appearing to escalate, he said. We file a formal affidavit stating you did not authorize use of your name. That triggers a review. By who? By people your parents don't control. I leaned back against the kitchen counter. My reflection in the microwave door looked older than I remembered. Not tired, sharper. And my family, I asked. They'll feel blindsided, he said. Even though they shouldn't. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, not grieving, not angry, just observing the shift inside myself. The part that used to want to be understood had gone quiet. In its place was something sturdier. Boundaries. 2 days later, the affidavit was filed. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't send dramatic messages or prepare explanations. I let the process do what it was designed to do. The fallout began subtly. My brother Evan stopped responding to texts. My mother sent a message that said only, "We need to talk," followed by nothing else. A cousin unfriended me on social media. Another posted a vague status about loyalty. I watched it all like weather passing through. Then came the letter. Certified. Heavy paper. Legal letterhead. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Donovan Holdings, LLC. But my name was all over it. A regulatory inquiry. Preliminary. Neutral in tone. But unmistakable in intent. I received a copy because I was, according to their records, a responsible party. I forwarded it to Daniel and waited. That night, my father showed up at my apartment unannounced. I knew it was him before I opened the door. The knock was too confident, too familiar. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not frail, just diminished. Like a man who had always relied on certainty and was suddenly standing on uneven ground. We need to fix this, he said immediately, stepping inside without asking. I didn't stop him. I didn't invite him either. He paced my living room, hands clasped behind his back. This inquiry, he said, it's unnecessary. It's creating complications. For who, I asked. He stopped pacing, looked at me directly. For the family. I nodded once. I'm not listed as family in the will. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Neither is forging my signature, I replied. The word landed between us heavy and undeniable. He didn't deny it. That's a strong accusation, he said finally. It's a factual one, I said. And I didn't make it publicly. I made it formally. He stared at me for a long moment, searching, I think, for the version of me that would flinch. The one who would back down to keep the peace. She wasn't there. You don't understand how these things work, he said, his voice dropping. We needed flexibility. You weren't around. I was alive, I said, and reachable. That's not the same, he snapped, then caught himself, smoothed his tone. Claire, you've always been independent. We thought you wouldn't want to be involved. Then why involve my name, I asked quietly. He looked away. That was my answer. I've withdrawn my authorization, I said. Formally. Any further use of my identity will be considered willful. You'd really do this, he asked. To us. I met his eyes. You already did it to me. He left shortly after. No apology, no threat, just a warning wrapped in disappointment. As if I'd failed a test I hadn't agreed to take. The next morning, Daniel called with an update. They're scrambling, he said, transferring roles, revising documents, trying to limit exposure. And me, you're clean, he said, but they're not done. That night, I lay awake thinking about something my father had said. You weren't around. Absence, I realized, had been my crime. My life, my choices, my refusal to orbit their expectations had made me convenient. Unclaimed territory, but I wasn't absent anymore. And once you step back into a system that's been using your silence, everything changes. I didn't know yet how far this would go. But I knew one thing. They were afraid now, and fear makes people sloppy. The first mistake they made was assuming fear would bring me back into line. The second was assuming silence meant surrender. 3 days after my father showed up at my apartment, the emails started. Not from him. Not directly. From people who had never contacted me before but suddenly remembered I existed. My Uncle Thomas forwarded an article about family unity in times of stress. My cousin Rachel sent a long message about how lawyers poison relationships. An old family friend I barely remembered left a voicemail reminding me that my parents had always spoken so proudly of me. None of them mentioned forged signatures. None of them asked if my name had been used without consent. They spoke around the issue like it was a stain they didn't want to look at too closely. I didn't respond to any of them. At work, I stayed focused. If anything, the situation sharpened me. I caught errors faster, asked quieter, more precise questions. My manager noticed. "You seem different lately," she said one afternoon after a meeting. "In a good way." I smiled. I've stopped pretending. That night, Daniel emailed me a development that shifted everything. The regulatory inquiry had expanded. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough to be dangerous. Donovan Holdings had been flagged for inconsistent compliance reporting. Minor discrepancies at first glance, but enough to trigger a deeper look. And when deeper looks happen, they don't stay contained. "They're asking for internal records," Daniel said when I called him. Meeting minutes, authorization logs, email correspondence. And I asked, "And those are things you can't fabricate overnight." I pictured my father pacing his home office, my mother at the dining table with stacks of papers, rewriting history line by line, my brother avoiding eye contact, my sister insisting this would all blow over if everyone just calmed down. Families like mine don't implode loudly. They corrode quietly, then collapse under their own weight. 2 nights later, my mother called. A cold. Her voice was softer than usual, measured, careful. "Claire," she said, "we're worried about you." I almost laughed. "I'm fine," I said. "This investigation," she continued, "it could hurt your future, your career. People might misunderstand." "That's possible," I said, which is why I documented everything. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "You don't need to do this," she said finally. "We can fix it internally." I leaned against the counterphone, pressed to my ear. "Fix what?" "Our mistake," she said. "Your father shouldn't have listed you without asking. It was an oversight." Oversight. Another word they used when they meant deliberate. "If it was an oversight," I said, "you'll have no problem submitting proof of consent." Silence. Then sharper than before. "Why are you being like this?" There it was. The question that always followed boundaries. "I'm being consistent," I said, "with the law." She exhaled a long, controlled breath. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I replied. "I'm stepping out of something you built without me." She hung up. The next morning, I received a notification from my credit monitoring service. A new inquiry. Business-related. My stomach tightened, but not with panic, with recognition. They were still trying to move things. I forwarded the alert to Daniel. His response came fast. "That's reckless," he wrote, "and useful." Within hours, he filed an addendum to my affidavit, documenting the attempted financial activity, creating a timeline. Paper trails don't care about intentions. They care about patterns. That afternoon, my brother Evan finally showed up. He stood in my doorway like a guest who wasn't sure he was welcome. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired. He looked older than his 35 years. "They're freaking out," he said without preamble. I stepped aside and let him in. "They think you're trying to destroy them," he continued. "Dad says this is turning into something it shouldn't." I poured water into 2 glasses, handed him one. It turned into something the moment they put my name on paperwork. He rubbed his face. "You could have talked to us first." "I did," I said. "At Christmas, in silence. When you handed me the will." He looked down at the glass. "That wasn't my call. Neither was the business," I said. "Yet my name's on it." He didn't argue. That told me more than any defense could. "They're talking about restructuring," he said quietly. "Moving assets, changing roles." I met his eyes. "That won't change what's already filed." He swallowed. "What do you want?" It was the first honest question anyone in my family had asked me. "I want my name removed," I said. "Completely. I want written confirmation, and I want no further contact regarding any business matters." "And if they don't?" I held his gaze. "Then the process continues." He nodded slowly. "They're scared." "So am I said, "but I'm not hiding." When he left, I felt a strange lightness. Not relief, clarity. That weekend, Daniel called again. "They made a move," he said. My pulse quickened. "What kind?" "They filed amended documents," he explained. "Removed your name retroactively." "That's good, right?" He paused. "It would be, if retroactive changes were legal in this context." I closed my eyes. "They're trying to erase the trail." "Exactly," he said. Which tells us they know the trail matters. On Monday morning, I received a formal notice from the state. A request for a statement, clarification of my role, voluntary for now. I printed it, read it twice, then forwarded it to Daniel. This is the moment he said when we spoke. You can cooperate fully and protect yourself, or you can step back and hope it blows over. I'm not hoping anymore, I said. That afternoon, I drafted my statement. I didn't embellish, I didn't accuse, I didn't speculate. I laid out dates, conversations, documents. I attached evidence, screenshots, copies, timelines. It felt like setting something down that I'd been carrying for years without knowing its shape. When I finished, I signed my name. My real signature, clean, deliberate. As I sealed the envelope, my phone a message from my sister. Please stop! This is getting out of control! I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. It already was, I wrote. I just finally saw it. I dropped the envelope into the mailbox that evening. The metal door clanged shut with a finality that settled deep in my chest. I didn't know what the consequences would be yet. For them, for me. But I knew this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that changed everything. The waiting was the hardest part. Not because I feared the outcome, but because waiting stripped away the illusion of control my family had always relied on. Once the statement was filed, once the timeline was submitted, there was nothing left to tweak or spin. The machinery had been set in motion, and it didn't care about intentions or explanations. It only cared about records. For the first time, my parents couldn't talk their way out of something. The official acknowledgement arrived on a Tuesday morning, a plain email from the state's regulatory office confirming receipt of my statement and advising me not to discuss the matter with other involved parties. Neutral language. Polite. Firm. I read it twice, then archived it. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my office. Not in the lobby. Not announced. She waited across the street, pacing beside her car until I stepped out at 5 o'clock. I saw her before she saw me, her posture rigid, her hands clenched around her purse strap like she was bracing herself. Claire, she said as soon as I approached, her voice tight, we need to talk. I looked at the glass front of my building, the reflection of my own face staring back at me. Calm, composed, older than she remembered. I can't, I said. I've been advised not to. Her eyes flickered. Advised by who? My attorney. That word landed harder than anything else I could have said. She scoffed a short, sharp sound. You always did like to escalate. I didn't respond. I waited. You don't understand what you're doing, she continued, lowering her voice. This could ruin us. I met her gaze. You used my name without permission. That's not how it happened, she snapped. You weren't around. We had to make decisions. There it was again, absence as justification. I wasn't around, I said slowly, because you taught me early that being present didn't protect me. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, something like uncertainty crossed her face. Then it hardened into resolve. You're choosing strangers over your own family, she said. I thought of the investigators, the forms, the signatures, the paper trail that existed because I had finally stopped protecting people who wouldn't protect me. No, I said. I'm choosing accountability. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Your father is sick over this, she said finally. He hasn't slept. I nodded once. Neither have I, for different reasons. She stepped closer. If you withdraw your statement, we can fix everything. That was the moment. The moment I saw the line clearly unblurred by history or guilt or obligation. If I withdraw, I said I become complicit. Her eyes widened. That's dramatic. It's accurate, I replied. She shook her head, disbelief mixing with anger. After everything we gave you. I almost laughed then, but stopped myself. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending something. You didn't give me anything, I said quietly. You took from me and called it love. She stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, then turned and walked away without another word. She didn't look back. I watched her drive off, feeling nothing like relief or triumph, just a strange, hollow clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop expecting people to be different than they are. 2 days later, my attorney called with news that shifted the ground again. They've expanded the inquiry, Daniel said. Formal audit, full scope. My grip tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means they're pulling everything he said. Accounts, emails, internal communications. Not just the business. Personal transfers, too. I closed my eyes. They won't like that. No, he agreed. And they won't be able to stop it. That evening, my brother texted. They're asking questions about old transactions, he wrote. Things from years ago. I didn't reply. Another message followed. Dad says you're doing this on purpose. I typed slowly. I'm telling the truth on purpose. The response bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I didn't know it went this far. I believed him. That didn't change anything. The first formal interview request came the following week. Voluntary, scheduled, professional. I took the day off work and met Daniel at his office beforehand. He reviewed everything again, making sure my answers stayed within the facts. No speculation, no emotion. You're not on trial, he reminded me. They're building context. Context. Another word that had always been used against me. Context meant interpretation, and interpretation could be bent. But facts, when laid out cleanly, had a way of standing upright on their own. The interview itself was uneventful. 2 investigators. One took notes, the other asked questions. Dates, conversations, documents. They didn't push, they didn't accuse, they listened. At the end, one of them looked up and said, "You did the right thing by coming forward." I nodded. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need validation. When I left the building, the air felt different. Sharper, colder, honest. The fallout at home was immediate. My parents stopped calling, completely. No messages, no updates, no attempts at reconciliation. Silence had always been their final weapon. I let it be. A week later, a letter arrived from my father's attorney. Not a threat. A request. A meeting, without prejudice. Daniel advised against it. They're looking for leverage, he said. Or forgiveness. Neither is available, I replied. That night, alone in my apartment, I took out the will again. The same thin envelope, the same neat language, the same quiet exclusion. I read it one last time, then I placed it in a folder with everything else. Evidence, history, closure. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have kept me tethered. What I felt now was distance. Emotional distance, finally earned. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the city still quiet outside my window. I made coffee and stood there watching the steam rise, thinking about the version of myself who would have begged for understanding. She would have swallowed this, apologized. I'll smooth things over. She didn't exist anymore. Whatever came next, I would meet it standing on my own ground. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the balance shifted. The audit didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like winter. Quiet at first, then everywhere. I noticed it in small ways before anyone said the word out loud. My father stopped attending his weekly Rotary lunches. My mother canceled a charity fundraiser she'd chaired for years, citing health reasons. Donovan Holdings' website went dark one afternoon without explanation. No announcement, no placeholder page, just gone. At work, I stayed careful. I didn't share details. I didn't speculate. I let my days remain boring on purpose. Routine became a kind of armor. 2 weeks into the audit, Daniel called me early one morning. They've frozen certain accounts, he said. I sat up in bed. Personal or business. Both, he replied. They found commingling. That word settled heavily in my chest. Commingling meant lines crossed, money moved where it shouldn't have, business funds paying personal expenses, personal accounts absorbing corporate transfers. It meant intent would be harder to deny. Am I exposed? I asked. Less every day, he said. Your early withdrawal and affidavit matter. Timing matters. I exhaled slowly. Timing had never worked in my favor before. It was strange to feel it do so now. That afternoon, my sister Brooke showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock the way my father had. She hovered, hesitated. When I opened the door, her eyes were already red, her mascara smudged like she'd been crying in the car. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. The diamond ring flashed under the lamp, catching the light with every nervous movement. A ring paid for with money now under review. They're asking me questions, she said, about things I don't understand. I poured water and set the glass on the table in front of her. What kind of questions? About signatures, emails, why certain documents list you as oversight. I nodded. And what did you tell them? She swallowed. The truth, that you weren't involved, that you didn't know. That surprised me. I studied her face looking for calculation. I didn't see it, just fear. They think Dad did this to protect us, she continued, to make sure everything stayed in the family. I sat across from her. He did it to control exposure. She flinched. You always see the worst in him? No, I said calmly. I see patterns. She shook her head. You could still help. Help how? By saying it was a misunderstanding, that he thought you agreed. I leaned back. That would be a lie. Her voice cracked. Do you really want him to go down for this? I didn't answer immediately. I chose my words carefully. I want the truth documented, I said. Whatever consequences follow aren't mine to decide. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. This family's falling apart, she whispered. I thought of Christmas dinner, the envelope, the will, the quiet certainty with which I'd been minimized. It was already broken, I said. I just stopped holding it together. She left shortly after, quieter than when she arrived. As she walked out, she turned once and said, You're not the villain you think you are. I watched the door close. I didn't think I was a villain. That was the point. A week later, the investigators requested a second interview. This one longer, more detailed. They brought documents I hadn't seen before. Internal emails, meeting notes, messages between my parents that made my stomach tighten as I read them. One email dated 2 years earlier stood out. We'll list Claire. She won't interfere. She never does. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I handed the page back without comment. After the interview, Daniel and I sat in his office in silence for a moment. They're building a case, he said finally. Against them, I asked. Yes, he said. And you're no longer adjacent. You're a witness? Witness. The word felt heavier than defendant in its own way. It meant distance, but also responsibility. That night, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in years. My grandmother's old landline. I answered out of instinct. It was my Aunt Marlene. They're saying awful things about you, she said without greeting. I closed my eyes. Who is they? Your parents, she replied. They say you've always been resentful, that you're doing this out of spite. I pictured my mother at her dining table, rewriting history again, this time for survival. I'm not resentful, I said. I'm finished. There was a pause. I saw the documents, Marlene said quietly. The ones with your name. And they're not yours, she said. Anyone with eyes can see that. Something loosened in my chest. Not relief, recognition. Thank you, I said. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark, thinking about how quickly narratives shift when power does. How silence is praised until it's inconvenient. How truth becomes betrayal the moment it threatens comfort. The next morning, the news broke quietly. Not a headline. A brief local piece. Regional firm under regulatory review. No names, no details. But in my family, it landed like an earthquake. My father called that afternoon, for the first time since Christmas. I let it ring. Then I answered. His voice was hoarse. They're taking everything apart. I know, I said. You didn't have to do this, he said. I closed my eyes. Yes, I did. You could have come to me, he insisted. I did, I replied. You didn't listen. Silence stretched between us. I was trying to protect you, he said finally. I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. No, I said. You were trying to use me. He didn't deny it. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want you to understand. I understand perfectly, I replied. That's why this conversation is over. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because things were resolved, but because they were no longer mine to manage. The next phase was coming. I could feel it. The escalation from inquiry to consequence. From discomfort to reckoning. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing myself. I was ready. The first subpoena arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under my door in a plain envelope that looked like junk mail. No drama. No knock. Just paper, doing what paper does best when it finally carries weight. I sat on the floor and read it carefully. I wasn't being accused of anything. I was being asked to testify, to confirm timelines, to authenticate documents, to say under oath what I already knew to be true. I forwarded it to Daniel and made coffee. By now, my family had stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. The language changed. Where they once said mistake, they now said misunderstanding of authority. Where they once said oversight, they now said assumption. Words meant to blur intent. Intent doesn't blur well on paper. The night before my deposition, my brother Evan came over again. This time he didn't hover. He sat heavily on the couch, like someone who'd finally accepted gravity. They're talking about charges, he said quietly. I nodded. That's what happens when audits find patterns. He ran a hand through his hair. Dad thinks you're enjoying this. I looked at him. I haven't enjoyed a single minute. But you're not stopping it, he said. I can't, I replied. And even if I could, I wouldn't. He flinched at that. You sound cold. No, I said. I sound finished. He stared at the floor. I should have said something earlier. Yes, I agreed. You should have. He looked up, eyes red. I was scared. So was I said. I just didn't hide behind silence. When he left, I felt the weight of something settle. Not guilt. Closure. The deposition itself was quiet. Controlled. A conference room with neutral walls and a recorder on the table. 2 investigators, a court reporter, Daniel beside me calm and steady. They asked about my relationship with Donovan Holdings, about my parents, about when I first became aware of my name on filings, about the will, about the timing. I answered simply. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. At one point, one of the investigators slid a document across the table. On an email chain, my father's words stared back at me from the page. She won't push back. She never does. I felt a brief sting in my chest. Not pain, recognition. That email wasn't addressed to you, the investigator said, but it references you. Did you know this conversation existed? No, I said, I didn't. And does it reflect your behavior at the time? I considered the question carefully. It reflects how they saw me. They nodded. That was enough. After the deposition, Daniel and I walked out into the afternoon sun. It was strangely warm for the season. I squinted, adjusting to the light. You did well, he said. I told the truth, I replied. That's doing well, he said. The escalation after that was swift. Within days, formal charges were filed. Not against the company alone, against individuals. My father, my mother, financial misrepresentation, fraud, false filings, identity misuse. The words looked unreal when I read them on the docket, like names pulled from someone else's life. My phone buzzed nonstop. Extended family, old friends, people who'd ignored me for years, suddenly desperate for clarity. I didn't answer most of them. My sister left a voicemail, late one night, her voice shaking. They're saying Mom could go to prison, she whispered. I don't know how to handle this. I listened, then deleted it. I wasn't cruel, I was done. A week later, I ran into my mother by accident at the grocery store. She looked smaller, tired, her hair pulled back without care. No makeup, no armor. We stood in the produce aisle between apples and oranges. 2 strangers pretending not to recognize each other. Then she spoke. You always wanted this, she said quietly. I turned to face her. No, I said. I wanted honesty. She laughed hollow. You got it. Yes, I replied. Eventually. She studied my face like she was trying to find the daughter she'd lost control over. You think you're better than us now, she said. No, I said. I think I'm free. Her mouth tightened. She turned and walked away. That night, I received a call from Daniel. They're offering a plea, he said. For them, I asked. Yes, he replied. Reduced sentencing in exchange for cooperation. And they want your support. I closed my eyes. For what? A statement, he said. About intent, about forgiveness. I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness had always been weaponized in my family, offered only if it restored balance in their favor. I won't lie, I said finally, and I won't soften the truth. That's what I told them, Daniel said. They're not happy. I wasn't surprised. The trial date was set. As it approached, I felt something shift inside me again. Not fear, not dread. Finality. The night before the trial began, I sat alone in my apartment, lights low, city humming outside. I thought about the version of myself who'd walked into Christmas dinner, expecting nothing, and still been disappointed. She hadn't known yet what it would cost to stop being convenient. I did, and I was still here. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, but emotionally. The kind of cold that settles in places where people come to tell the truth after spending years avoiding it. I arrived early as advised. Neutral clothes, no jewelry, hair pulled back. Nothing that could be misread as defiance or drama. Daniel met me at the door with a nod and a quiet, "You're ready." I wasn't sure anyone is ever ready to watch their parents sit at a defense table. They were already there when I took my seat behind the prosecution. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, shoulders squared, as if posture alone could save him. My mother sat beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face composed in the way she'd always mastered. Calm on the surface, calculating underneath. They didn't look at me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted acknowledgement, but because it confirmed something final. Even now, even here, they were choosing distance over accountability. The judge entered, everyone stood, then sat. The prosecutor began with a summary so measured it felt almost gentle. Dates, dollar amounts, filings, roles. A clean narrative built on paper, not emotion. As she spoke, I noticed something unsettling. My parents weren't reacting to the charges themselves. They were reacting to the loss of control, The way their lawyers leaned in to whisper. The way their eyes flicked toward the jury whenever certain phrases were spoken. They were still managing perception. The first witness was a forensic accountant. Dry, precise, effective. He walked the court through commingled funds, false authorizations, discrepancies that couldn't be explained away as oversight. Charts appeared on screens. Lines crossed where they shouldn't have. Then came internal emails. One by one, the words were read aloud. Not paraphrased. Read, "She won't interfere. She's not involved. Use her name. It adds credibility." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain. Something closer to mourning, not for them. For the years I'd spent believing my quiet nature was a flaw instead of a vulnerability they exploited. My mother shifted in her seat for the first time. When it was my turn to testify, I stood without hesitation. I took the oath, sat, looked straight ahead. The prosecutor asked me to state my name and occupation. Then she asked me to describe my relationship to Donovan Holdings. I had none, I said. She asked when I first learned my name was associated with the company. At Christmas, I replied. Through the will, I heard a murmur ripple through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. I explained calmly. The envelope, the amount, the omission. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The facts carried their own weight. Did you ever authorize the use of your name or signature for business purposes? She asked. No. Did you ever benefit financially from Donovan Holdings? No. Did you take steps to remove your name once you discovered its use? Yes. She nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney stood. He was smooth, polite. Ms. Donovan, he said, isn't it true that you've had a strained relationship with your parents for years? I wouldn't call it strained, I replied. I'd call it distant. Distant enough that you weren't aware of family business matters. Yes. Isn't it possible your parents believed you had consented? I met his eyes. No. He smiled faintly. How can you be so sure? Because consent requires communication, I said. And there was none. He tried another angle. You work in compliance, correct? Yes. So you're familiar with the power of regulatory pressure? I am. Could it be, he said, that you escalated the situation unnecessarily? I paused. No. Why not? Because the situation existed before I named it, I said. I didn't create it. I responded to it. He looked at his notes. Tried again. Isn't it true, he said, that your parents provided for your siblings in ways they did not provide for you? Yes. And didn't that cause resentment? No, I said. It caused clarity. That was when I heard my father inhale sharply. The defense attorney sat down. When I stepped off the stand, my legs felt steady. That surprised me. I'd expected adrenaline, fear, something loud. Instead, I felt quiet, like a room after furniture has been removed. The next witness was my brother. He looked terrified. He testified that he hadn't been involved in filings, that he'd trusted our parents, that he'd believed everything was legitimate. He didn't lie, but he didn't tell everything either. Silence has many shapes. Then came my sister. She cried, apologized, spoke about pressure, about expectations, about being told things were handled. Her tears were real. I believed that. But tears don't erase documents. By the time closing arguments began, the outcome felt inevitable. The defense spoke of family dynamics, of intentions, of mistakes made under pressure, of love. The prosecutor spoke of evidence, of patterns, of choices repeated long after mistakes could no longer explain them. When the judge delivered the verdict, the room felt impossibly still. Guilty, on multiple counts. My mother closed her eyes. My father finally looked at me. For a split second, I saw something there. Not regret, not love. Fear. The sentencing was scheduled for a later date, but the damage was done. The structure they'd built on control and silence had collapsed in public. As people filed out of the courtroom, I remained seated for a moment, letting it settle. Daniel touched my shoulder lightly. It's over. I nodded. No, I said. It's finished. Outside, the air felt warmer, lighter, like the world hadn't changed, but I had. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. I walked away without looking back. Because the hardest part wasn't testifying. It was accepting that the people who raised me had been willing to let me take the fall, and that knowing it no longer hurt. It freed me. The sentencing took place 6 weeks later, on a morning that felt strangely ordinary. The sky was pale. Traffic moved as usual. People hurried past the courthouse with coffee cups and headphones, unaware that inside an entire version of my family was about to be permanently dismantled. I arrived alone. Daniel met me at the steps and handed me a folded program. You don't have to stay for everything, he said quietly. Once statements are done, you can leave. I'll stay, I replied. Not because I wanted to watch them suffer, but because I wanted to witness the end without filters. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Reporters this time, not many, just enough. A few familiar faces from extended family sat in the back, clustered together like they might float away if they didn't hold on. My parents were brought in by deputies. No handcuffs, but no illusions either. My father looked older. Not tired, hollowed. His confidence had always been his armor, and without it, he seemed almost unfinished. My mother walked carefully, her chin lifted, expression tight. She still believed composure could protect her. It couldn't. The judge entered and reviewed the charges again. Fraud, misrepresentation, identity misuse, breach of fiduciary duty. Then came the victim impact statements. One by one, people stood. Investors, business partners, individuals who had trusted the name Donovan because it had once meant stability. They spoke about lost savings, delayed retirements, stress-related illness, shame. Not one of them looked at me with blame. That mattered more than I expected. Then the judge asked if the family wished to make statements. My sister declined. My brother declined. My father stood. He cleared his throat, looked at the judge, then finally at me. I made decisions, he said. I thought I was protecting my family. I see now that I crossed lines. He paused, then added, I never meant to hurt my daughter. The room was silent. I felt nothing, because intent doesn't undo impact. My mother stood next. Her voice was controlled even now. I followed my husband's direction, she said. I trusted him. I never believed this would go so far. I almost smiled. Trust again, used as a shield. When it was my turn, the judge asked if I wished to speak. Daniel glanced at me. A question, not a suggestion. I stood. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at the bench. My name was used without my consent, I said. My silence was interpreted as permission. I was placed in legal jeopardy without my knowledge. I paused. I don't ask for leniency or severity. I ask for accuracy. The judge nodded. That was all. The sentences were handed down. My father received a multi-year sentence. Not the maximum. Enough to matter. My mother received less time, but enough to feel the weight of it. Financial penalties, restitution orders. As they were led away, my father turned one last time. I didn't meet his eyes. Some things don't deserve acknowledgement. Outside the courtroom, microphones waited. Questions hovered in the air like gnats. I walked past them. At home that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, with the lights off, city glowing beyond the windows. I felt tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Not drained, released. A week later, Daniel called with the final piece. There's been a revision, he said. To what? The estate. I closed my eyes. Go on. Your grandmother's trust, he said. It was amended before her death. You're now the sole beneficiary? I swallowed. I didn't know. She did, he said. She anticipated this. I thought of her quiet warnings, her careful questions, the way she looked at me at family gatherings like she was memorizing my face. What does it include, I asked. Assets, accounts, a property, he said. Not enormous, but enough to give you security. Security. The word felt heavy with meaning. And the will, I asked. Still stands, he replied, but it doesn't touch the trust. That night, I pulled the old will out of the folder one last time. I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it. I recycled it. Paper returns to pulp. That felt right. Weeks passed. The news cycle moved on. My family stopped reaching out. Silence this time felt mutual. I focused on my work. Took on a new role. Led a compliance initiative that helped prevent exactly the kind of misuse I'd experienced. It felt like closure, not revenge. One afternoon, my sister emailed a short message. No apologies, no accusations. I hope you're okay. I replied simply, I am. Because I was. I had learned something I wished I'd known sooner. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. And choosing yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. The months after sentencing felt unreal, like living in the echo of a sound that had already faded. The crisis was over, but its shape lingered in everything. In the way people paused before mentioning my parents' names. In the way silence now felt earned instead of imposed. I didn't move. I didn't reinvent myself. I stayed exactly where I was and let my life grow quieter. That turned out to be its own kind of rebellion. The trust paperwork arrived in stages. Thick envelopes, legal language, diagrams of assets and timelines. I sat at my kitchen table and read every page slowly, the way I always had pen in hand, making notes in the margins. My grandmother hadn't left me a dramatic inheritance. No grand gestures, just a careful structure designed to protect rather than impress. Conservative investments, a small lakeside property in upstate New York, enough liquidity to breathe. More importantly, clauses. The clear, specific, unmistakable. No family member could contest it. No trustee could override it. No one could touch it but me. She'd seen this coming. I closed the folder and sat there for a long time feeling something close to grief, something close to gratitude, and something steadier than both. Respect. At work, I was asked to speak at an internal training on ethical compliance. The invitation was framed carefully, optional, supportive. I accepted. Standing in front of that room, I didn't tell my story. I didn't need to. I talked about systems, about accountability, about how harm doesn't always arrive with malicious intent, but with small repeated choices that go unchallenged. Afterward, a woman I barely knew approached me. "Thank you," she said quietly. That helped. That was enough. One afternoon, as summer edged toward fall, I received a letter postmarked from a federal correctional facility. My father. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter and made tea, watched the water boil, let the moment settle. When I finally did open it, the handwriting was shaky. He wrote about time, about regret, about how he wished he'd done things differently, about how he'd always believed he was steering the family in the right direction. There was no apology. Not really, just explanation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't write back. A few weeks later, my mother wrote. Her letter was shorter, sharper. She spoke about betrayal, about how public exposure had ruined her reputation, about how I could have handled things privately. I threw that one away. Autumn arrived without asking permission. Leaves turned. Air sharpened. I visited the lakeside property for the first time in October. It was quiet, modest, a place my grandmother had escaped to when she needed distance. I stood on the dock, hands in my pockets, watching the water move without hurry. I understood then why she'd loved it. No one expected anything from you there. On the drive back, I made a decision I hadn't planned. I called Daniel. "I want to update my own estate documents," I said. "That's wise," he replied. "Any specific concerns?" "Yes," I said. "I want everything clean, simple, and untouchable." We scheduled the meeting. In his office weeks later, I signed my own will. It felt strange doing it at my age, but also grounding, like placing a marker in the ground. This is mine. This ends here. As winter approached, I noticed something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Not numb, not detached, just clear. I could think about my parents without the sharp pull of emotion. They were people who had made choices. Those choices had consequences. That was all. One evening, my brother called. "I moved," he said, "out of state." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I hope it's a good start." "It is," he said. "I wanted you to know I didn't blame you. I never did." "I know," I replied. We hung up without promises or plans. That felt right. The year ended quietly. No dramatic holidays. No forced gatherings. Just routines. Warm lights. Simple meals. On New Year's Eve, I stood by my window watching fireworks bloom and fade over the city. I thought about the person I'd been before Christmas. Careful, accommodating, quiet in ways that weren't chosen. And I thought about the person standing there now, still quiet, but by choice. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. Not in celebration, in acknowledgement. Some endings don't need applause, they need space. The first real test of my new life didn't come from my family. It came from someone who saw the gap they left behind. It happened in early spring, almost a year after the sentencing, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old habits die slowly, but something told me to answer. "Ms. Donovan," a man asked. "Professional, controlled." "Yes." "My name is Michael Reyes. I represent a private investment group that's recently acquired several distressed assets connected to Donovan Holdings." I stayed silent. "We'd like to speak with you," he continued. "There may be opportunities for collaboration, given your background and history." There it was, the polite version of exploitation. "I'm not interested," I said. "I think you should hear us out," he replied smoothly. "Your family name still carries weight in certain circles." I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, not fear, recognition. "My family name doesn't belong to me," I said, "and I don't borrow credibility from things that burn down." There was a pause, then a quiet recalibration in his tone. "Understood," he said. "If you change your mind—" "I won't," I replied and ended the call. I sat there afterwards, staring at my phone, realizing how close I'd come to repeating a pattern. Not theirs, mine. The habit of listening longer than necessary, of considering what didn't deserve space. That was the moment I understood something clearly. Walking away once isn't the victory. Walking away every time after that is. A few weeks later, I received an email from the state compliance office. A formal acknowledgement closing my involvement in the case. No further action required. My name officially cleared. I printed it and placed it in the same folder as my affidavit. Then I closed the folder. At work, I was offered a promotion, a real one, more responsibility, more visibility, the kind I used to shy away from because visibility invites scrutiny and scrutiny had never felt safe. This time I accepted without hesitation. I didn't tell my family. I didn't announce it online. I let it exist quietly, solidly, without witnesses. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I came across a box I hadn't opened in years. Childhood photos, cards, mementos, things I'd brought with me when I first moved out, then never touched again. At the bottom was a handwritten note from my grandmother. No envelope, just folded paper. "You don't owe anyone access to you," it read, especially people who confuse control with care. I sat on the floor and read it twice. She'd known, long before I did. That summer, I spent more time at the lake house. I painted one of the spare rooms, planted herbs by the kitchen window, invited friends, not family. Laughter returned to the space, unforced and easy. One evening, as the sun dropped low over the water, a friend asked me if I ever missed my parents. I thought about it. I missed the idea of them, I said, finally, not the reality. She nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. In late August, my sister sent another message. This one was different. No guilt, no urgency. "I'm in therapy," she wrote. "I see things differently now. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I replied, "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. Nothing more, nothing less." It felt honest. That night, I realized something else had changed. I no longer needed them to understand. Understanding had never been the missing piece. Respect had. And respect doesn't require proximity. As fall approached again, the anniversary of that Christmas crept closer. I noticed it only because my body remembered, before my mind did. A tension in my shoulders, a restlessness I couldn't quite name. So I planned something different. I booked a quiet trip, no family, no obligations, just distance. On the drive upstate, windows down, music low, I thought about how easily my life could have gone another way, how close I'd come to absorbing blame that wasn't mine, how silence had almost become my sentence. Instead, it had become my strength, because silence, when chosen, is power. And I had finally chosen myself. I spent the anniversary of that Christmas alone by choice, not avoidance. The lake was still when I arrived, the water flat, as glass reflecting a pale winter sky. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the quiet settle around me without trying to fill it. There was a time when silence felt like punishment, like something earned by not being enough, not being loud enough, not fitting neatly into whatever role had been assigned. Standing there, boots by the door, coat still on, I understood how wrong that had been. Silence was never the absence of love. It was the absence of noise. I lit the fireplace and made tea. Simple motions, ordinary comforts. I sat at the table and watched steam rise from the mug, thinking about how close I had come to losing everything that mattered because I'd been trained to keep the peace at my own expense. What changed my life wasn't the trial or the sentencing or the inheritance. Those were outcomes. The real shift happened much earlier in a quiet moment when I chose documentation over denial questions, over compliance clarity, over approval. I thought about my parents in their separate facilities, living inside the consequences of choices they once justified as necessary. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance, clean and complete. I thought about my siblings, each navigating their own reckoning. I wished them peace from afar. Distance doesn't mean cruelty, it means honesty. I thought about my grandmother and the way she'd protected me without fanfare, the way she left behind something more valuable than money, proof that someone had seen me clearly and chosen my future over their comfort. That night, I wrote a short note and placed it in the desk drawer. If you're reading this, it means you've already survived the worst part. Don't rush to explain yourself. Let the truth do the talking. The next morning, I woke early and walked down to the dock. The cold air stung my cheeks. The water moved slowly, patient and unbothered. I stood there longer than necessary, hands in my pockets, breathing. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. When I returned to the city, my life resumed its quiet rhythm. Work that mattered, people who showed up, boundaries that held. I no longer chased closure from people who had shown me who they were. I created my own. The final paperwork arrived a week later. One last confirmation, one last signature. I signed it without ceremony and filed it away. The chapter was closed not with bitterness, but with precision. There's a misconception about revenge. People imagine it as confrontation, as raised voices and dramatic moments. In my experience, the most effective kind is quieter than that. It looks like reclaiming your name, protecting your future, refusing to carry what was never yours. It looks like walking away and building something clean. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, let me say this plainly. You don't owe anyone access to your life because they share your blood. You don't owe silence to people who profit from it. And you don't need permission to choose yourself. The moment you stop trying to be understood by those who benefit from misunderstanding you is the moment you get your life back. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived your own version of it, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment, share your experience. And if you want more stories like this told honestly and without apology, subscribe. Some truths take time to surface, but once they do, they change everything.